All right, welcome to another episode of Justin and Donald Save America. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of stories that make it seem like maybe the Great Reset isn't as impervious to damage as we might have thought. Seemingly it's having a bad week. Maybe it's on the ropes. I don't know. We're going to talk about it on this episode and more. Justin and Donald Save America, episode 8. As always, I am Donald Kendal, joined by Justin Haskins over here. We're going to get all into this stuff, but first I want to put out that call that if you want to help our show grow and get more viewers and stuff, the easiest thing that you can do is just hit the like button, leave a comment, share this content, make sure to become a subscriber, all things that help kind of break through that big tech algorithm that prevents shows like this from reaching a larger audience. Justin, we were talking about things that we can talk about on this episode, and a couple of them had a theme of, I think the Great Reset has taken a pounding in the last week or so. I think the big story is the Build Back Better plan, which we've been talking about for I don't know how long. Seems like this is the big thing, the big cornerstone piece of legislation for the Biden administration, and it's dead. What can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So what's really interesting, and it's kind of a terrifying thing in a way. Going into this year, we knew that Democrats would have control of everything: the Senate, the House of Representatives, the White House. We knew that their margins were very thin, but I mean, let's be honest. It was all going to come down to a couple votes, so some pretty big pieces of legislation. And this is one of those things. And I don't think any of us felt super confident about that margin of error.
Sure.
And Joe Manchin has repeatedly, Senator from West Virginia, has repeatedly proven that he is not going to cave to the pressure of his party and is going to shut down some pretty big pieces of legislation. And it's remarkable. I mean, for it to happen once or twice, okay, but he's been consistently doing this, and it's amazing. Joe Manchin is right now the most powerful person in Washington, D.C., without a doubt. The most powerful person in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden is not as powerful as Joe Manchin. He's just not. Joe Manchin is the most powerful person in Washington, D.C. He's the most powerful Joe in Washington, D.C. It's pretty amazing, really, when you think about it, isn't it? And this whole saga with the Build Back Better bill is proof of that fact. This is something that was going to become the key piece of legislation.
Right.
The key signature piece, like Obamacare was for Barack Obama, like the tax cuts were for Donald Trump.
Right.
This was the key thing that he was going to build his whole first term around. Transformation of all sorts of things, giant expansion of government programs. Universal pre-K is involved in this. Massive $500 billion green energy type stuff. Like that's sort of the Green New Deal light that he's been pushing for to save the world from global warming. He's got child tax credit expansion in there, earned income tax credit expansion, just sending middle-class people money in the mail for having kids, is one of the things that he wants to do. You've got a kid, so that helps you. It doesn't help me as much. I'm still waiting for the elderly dog tax credit. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. So maybe next year. But it's all these giant things in this huge piece of legislation, more than $2 trillion, one of the biggest pieces of legislation ever to get this close to passing in U.S. history. And they just could not push it over the finish line because of literally one guy.
Right.
One guy. And so just in and of itself, just the drama of it is pretty amazing.
I don't know, with our work at the Heartland Institute, obviously a lot of people are keeping their eyes on the Build Back Better, or whatever it was been called over the course of the last several months. And it went through its little ebbs and flows. It seemed like it was kind of on the ropes at certain points, and it's like, oh, it's inevitable at other points. And then it was like, oh, I don't think it's going to get passed. Everyone's leaving for Thanksgiving, and they're going to keep them there so that they can force a vote later. And then it was like, okay, maybe it's not going to pass. And then Nancy Pelosi's is like, oh, we're pretty confident it's going to happen. So it's like, it's been a roller coaster of emotions with this thing. And when the news came down that he's like, did he issue a tweet or something? I thought there was some statement that was like, yeah, I'm not passing this. Merry Christmas. It was like,
yeah,
mic drop.
I don't know. He was on Fox News Sunday,
Okay.
and he did an interview, and I think that's where he very first announced it. But then he did other media and he did other statements and stuff after the fact, I think, where he just came out and said, like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. I negotiated in good faith. I tried to get this thing into the right situation, and it just couldn't make it happen. And I wasn't going to vote for something that I didn't believe in, basically,
Right.
was his primary statement. And so actually, I think in this article that you have, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to see it. If you scroll up a little bit more, yeah, there's the quote right there from one of the first interviews he did after he announced that he wasn't going to do it. He said, I knew what they could and could not do. This is Joe Manchin. They just never realized it because they figure, surely to God, we can move one person. Surely we can badger and beat one person up. And then he says, well, guess what? I'm from West Virginia. I'm not from where they're from, where they can just beat the living crap out of people and think they'll be submissive. So, he's not going along with it. He doesn't care how much pressure they're gonna put on him. And it blows me away. It blows me away, really.
Because at first, there was obviously he's been the resistance for this for a while now, and there was a bunch of theories as to what he was doing. What's his game here? Like, is he just trying to hold out so he can get a little bit more pork in this bill for people in his state and all that types of stuff? And it's just like, I think with a statement like that and some of the other statements that he's put out, it makes it seem like maybe he was amenable to coming along on this bill at some point. But at this point, it seems like no. Like, they could like have his family hostage and he'd still say, screw you, I'm not passing this thing.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And I think one of the things that happened for him, a couple of big, I think, really key things that happened in this whole saga. The first is that Joe Manchin, I think, was scared by the inflation. I think the inflation stuff really bothered him and actually did worry him. And he came out and he said as much. He said that he's very concerned about inflation and he thinks that all of this is gonna make the problem worse. And he's 100% right.
Oh,
that
of course.
That is absolutely going to happen. The idea that this bill is not going to cost anything, as Joe Biden said, it's literally going to cost zero, is what it's like almost a direct quote. He literally used the word zero, was what the cost was going to be.
Wouldn't add a penny to the national debt.
Yeah. The idea that it isn't going to cost anything, that's all totally 100% paid for, is a gigantic myth. It's a gigantic myth. Now, where does that myth come from, and why does that myth make Joe Manchin so afraid? The myth comes from this idea that the legislation as it is currently written is actually reflective of what is going to happen after they pass it. And what I mean by that is, this is one of the most deceiving pieces of gigantic legislation that has ever been, I guess you could say passed, but it hasn't actually become law yet.
Sure.
It's extremely, extremely deceiving. On a very grand scale. And the reason why is because the legislation is written in such a way that a lot of the key parts of it, the parts that are supposedly going to be transformative and help all these poor people and all this stuff, that the whole purpose, the moral behind this thing, this moral movement behind this big Build Back Better bill, a lot of those key provisions sunset out in some cases after 1 year. Right. In other cases, it's after 6 years. Like the universal pre-K is a good example of this. The universal pre-K program. This is a program that's going to create nationwide universal pre-K, preschool for everybody, right? This thing is actually set to expire in 6 years. Well, does that make any sense? Why would you make a universal pre-K program, get everybody hooked on it, and then get rid of it in 6 years? Well, because the answer is they know they're not going to get rid of it in 6 years, right? That's the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a strategy that drug dealers employ too.
Yeah, it's right. Well, yeah, it is.
Give me the first one for free.
Right. In a way, that's true. And so why did they do that? Why they wrote a whole bunch of things in the law: the earned income tax credit expansion, the child care tax credit expansion, the child tax credit, which is a different thing, expansion or extension of the expansion, which already happened. I talked about the universal pre-K thing. There's other stuff in there too, where it all phases out over either 1 year or in a few years or 6 years or whatever. So why did they do that? They did it because it makes the legislation over a 10-year period, which is how these things are usually scored in Congress, cheaper than it actually is.
Right.
It makes it look like it's more affordable than it really is. So then what they did was they created all these taxes that last for 10 years or more or permanently to pay for a bunch of programs that are only going to exist for a year to 6 years.
Right.
They know that when these things come up for expiration, they're going to have to pass them again. They're going to have to extend them because they're not going to get rid of universal pre-K. But then at that time, all of the things that are supposedly in place to pay for the program, you're going to have to make even more taxes or print more money on top of what you've already done in order to pay for the extension. So it's a giant scam. It looks more affordable than it actually is. Even with all that said, when the CBO scored it, because as misleading as that is, because we're talking about, by the way, if they were to extend all of these things out over 10 years, so all these things that are supposed to sunset, you extend them out for 10 years, the total cost of this thing is $5 trillion, okay? Which is more than double what they're saying it is. And the total amount added to the deficit is almost $3 trillion, not zero. So $3 trillion over 10 years, not zero. And that's just over 10 years. Well, then after the 10 years, it's even more money unless they came up with more taxes and things to try to offset all of that. And they have no plans whatsoever to do any of that. This is all just a gigantic scam. So Joe Manchin, to just tie this all up, Joe Manchin knows that, okay? Because this has been a thing they've been debating for a long time in Congress. They know that they've been playing games with the funding and all of this stuff. And so Joe Manchin looks at this and says, well, wait a minute. We're already running massive deficits, like huge, massive deficits, over $1 trillion a year. We've spent more money in the past 2 years than we have ever spent in a single year. And now you want to add trillions more over the next 10 years. And basically, you're not going to pay for it with any kind of tax increases or anything. You're just going to basically print the money. Well, if you're printing the money and you're pumping it into the economy, you get inflation, which is exactly what we've been seeing. So you already have inflation. You already have some of the highest rates of inflation we've had in 40 years. And they want to spend even more money, print it essentially, pump it into the economy, and cause even greater inflation. And Joe Manchin's looking at this and saying, what? Like, this is insane.
Yeah.
This is insane.
Yeah, that CBO score, like, it was almost a miracle, I would say, because like for them to actually take all this stuff into account and not just take this legislation on its word that these programs are going to expire after a year, we all know that it won't. And they actually ran the numbers on what the full 10 years would cost and everything. It's a miracle.
So initially, the CBO did not. Initially, they did what they always do, which is they only look at the exact wording of the legislation and they didn't project out reality. Okay. Initially, that's what they did. But even in their CBO score, it wasn't zero. It was still a deficit of like $150 billion to 300 and something billion dollars, even in their own estimate.
Peanuts.
Right. And they didn't even say it was going to cost zero even under that scenario. But then I think someone requested, like a member of Congress, I think requested that they do another analysis. And then that included, well, what would happen if we did expand all these things out? Because again, everyone knows that's what's going to happen. We're going to extend them all. And then when they redid it, they came up with this $3 trillion number roughly.
And let's also point out that the CBO is also notorious for understating the cost of things. So while they say it's going to be $3 trillion over the next 10 years, you could bet your bottom dollar that'll probably end up being $8 to $10 trillion. Right. So there's that too. But the thing is, like, if this was Manchin's biggest concern, the specter of inflation and how that's going to hurt his constituents in his state and all of that, then that CBO score coming out and being like, no, this is going to be nowhere near cost neutral. This is going to add trillions to the debt. Like, that could have been the final straw. That was just like, you know what? Forget it. This ain't happening. So again, it's like a miracle that happened. I can't even understate the importance of that CBO score when it came out.
I mean, it's amazing that the CBO did it. There were some really great think tanks and other groups that I think the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, that were very early on pushing out that number and saying, whoa, wait a minute. If you guys actually extend all these things out, this is going to be way more money than you're saying. And that caused a lot of people to jump on that and say, well, the CBO thing, even, which is not saying it's going to cost zero, but the CBO number looks low to us. And so there were a lot of people involved that were very helpful in this, people realizing that this was the case. The reason it matters is not just because this would be a giant expansion of government, not just because it would hook a lot of middle income people on government services and on tax credits and all these things, not just that it would run up the debt and deficits, not just that it would push us even closer, deeper down the modern monetary theory, abyss that we're already falling down at this point in time. Not only would it expand the power of government and do all these things, but the reason we titled this episode focused around the Great Reset is that the Great Reset, this global movement for transformation of the economy, has two major parts to it. The first part is essentially what this Build Back Better Act is. And the Build Back Better slogan comes straight from the Great Reset people at the World Economic Forum and others, and they've used it all over the world, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, and elsewhere. And it's exactly what this thing is. It's big, gigantic infrastructure programs built around climate change, fear, and stuff like that, which is all in this $500 billion. It's expansion of the of government in people's lives, including in the middle class, and an expansion of the welfare state to varying degrees, depending on what country you're talking about. But here in this particular case, we've got the universal pre-K and other things, which isn't really a welfare state thing. It's just sort of a big social government program. But expansion of these things, and massive money printing and modern monetary theory and all of that plays right into what the Great Reset is all about. The other part of the Great Reset is the ESG score stuff that we've talked about before, where you rework capitalism, you rework the economy so that companies are focused on woke causes and they get literally scores for how woke they are and all of that. And you can look at our videos and articles and stuff we've done on the Great Reset. And we could post some of those in the show notes too, if you're interested in learning more about that and you don't know anything about it. But this was a huge part of all of that.
Yeah,
this was a big part of it. And it's been cut off at the knees by one guy. One guy.
Right.
Which is amazing.
So it's a cornerstone of the potential cornerstone. They wanted to be the cornerstone of the Biden legacy, the Biden administration legacy. But as you were just describing, it's also a major component of the Great Reset. And you're right, being held up by one guy. So of course, when it's being held up by one guy, all the ire of the people that are supporting this type of thing is directed at this one guy. So I found this video. Maybe we'll just play it and react to it. I haven't watched it, but it promises to be a compilation video of liberal politicians being very upset at Joe Manchin. So let's pull this up here.
Your reaction to Joe Biden? Do you still trust Joe Manchin? Was he negotiating in bad faith, sir? Mr. President, is Build Back Better dead?
Joe Biden doesn't even know where he's walking right now. He's just walking through a random field.
Get your agenda passed through Congress, sir.
Where is he going?
Sanders, Chairman Sanders, Senator Manchin says he can't get there. This is a no. He's tried everything. What's your reaction?
Well, I think he's going to have a lot of explaining to do to the people of West Virginia, to tell them why he doesn't have the guts to take on the drug companies and lower the cost of prescription drugs, why he is not prepared to expand home health care. West Virginia is one of the poorest states in this country. You got elderly people and disabled people who would like to stay.
Disabled people.
You've got elderly people and disabled people everywhere, Bertie. They're in every state.
He's going to have to tell the people of West Virginia why he doesn't want to expand Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and eyeglasses. I've been to West Virginia a number of times, and it's a great state.
Virginia.
Beautiful people. But it is a state that is struggling.
People.
And he's going to have to tell the people of West Virginia why he's rejecting what the scientists of
it's not like those uggos down in Georgia. Like, what is he saying?
The world are telling us that we have to act boldly and transform our energy system to protect future generations from the devastation of climate change. You know what's going on now,
the
Jake,
people of West Virginia are not worried about climate change, by the way.
Washington, is the big money interests are pouring hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that we continue to pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, that the rich do not start paying their fair share of taxes.
Oh my gosh.
And I would have hoped that we could have had at least 50 Democrats on board who have the guts to stand up for working families and take on the lobbyists and the powerful special interests. We have no Republican support. Now, one Republican in the United States Senate or the House, for that matter, is prepared to stand up to the drug companies or the insurance companies or the wealthy.
So maybe this is a tangent, but like,
I'm so sick of
who
this.
is the party that's going up to bat for the giant pharmaceutical companies throughout all of COVID and all of this stuff? Like, let's be real here. This isn't confined to like, you know, Joe Manchin or anything like that. But
well, the thing that kills me is that Bernie Sanders, this is classic. It's a smart political thing for Bernie Sanders to do. He does it all the time. Anytime he fails, which is a lot, he always
career
blames
marked
it.
by failure.
He always blames it on this idea that it's the reason he's failing is not because his ideas are bad. It's not because he couldn't convince someone. It's not because voters, didn't want it. It's because there's all this money from pharmaceutical companies and all these other people, and they're giving money as political donations to, I guess in this case, Joe Manchin, as well as every Republican, but not to any Democrats,
Not
I guess.
any of them, no.
And that's the reason why he voted. He didn't want to do it. It's because he was getting all this money from drug companies, and so he decided not to do it.
Right.
And if you look at first of all, if you just look at political donations and you just look at who the biggest political donors are, they're mostly like far left-wing organizations and groups, and they're often like unions,
Sure.
and especially teachers unions, labor unions. Those are the biggest donors in the country. They're the biggest donors. Okay. It's not pharmaceutical companies. Number one. Number two is they're all getting paid off from pharmaceutical companies and all of these other big corporations and everything else. I don't deny that what Bernie Sanders says about Washington, D.C. being corrupt and that they're getting all this money from corporations and others. That's true. They're all getting it, though. The idea that it's just the Republicans are getting it from the big pharmaceutical companies and Democrats aren't, like, that's a load of crap. The pharmaceutical companies have made out really, really well because of Democrat policies over the past couple of decades. And Republicans, I'm sure, have contributed to it and whatever. But the idea that Democrats are not part of that problem is completely ludicrous. And the idea that Joe Manchin in particular, that's the one thing that's he's like, well, I just won my election a couple years ago, but, in 4 years, the pharmaceutical companies might not donate to my campaign. So I guess I better do this. And, I don't care what the people of West Virginia want. Screw them. All I care about is what the pharmaceutical companies think. Like, they're the ones. It's like, come on. That is obviously not true. The most logical explanation is that Joe Manchin, a Democrat from a far deep red state, a right-wing state, probably doesn't want to go for one of the biggest expansions of government in the past 2 decades. Maybe that's the reason why.
Right, exactly.
It's a state that Trump won overwhelmingly twice, and this guy's a Democrat who only wins elections in this state because he sells himself as a moderate, plays right down the middle, a sort of common sense Democrat, and you're asking him to go along with with legislation that has no common sense to it whatsoever. You can't even pay for. You don't think that's maybe the reason? It's not because Pfizer's giving him a couple extra $1,000 to his campaign. It's because he wants to win. He wants a political future in a state that is a deep red Trump voting state. And those people don't want giant expansions of government.
Right.
And they don't care about climate change. They're not climate alarmists there. They live in freaking West Virginia where it's cold and they're in the mountains. So the idea that they're worried about sea level rise and slightly warmer temperatures is like kind of off base here, I think. Come on.
Bernie even said that he would pay for like polling to see how popular Build Back Better was, in fact, in West Virginia. And like, I would love to take him up on that offer, but surely it would be worded in a way that would be like, looking for an answer. Like, yeah, of course I want Medicaid expansion or something, whatever. But all right, let's go back to this video here.
Biden was so angry yesterday. All right, Congresswoman Bush, thank you very much for coming to the Sunday show. Your reaction to the news announced by Senator Manchin.
So, first of all, it is not a huge surprise. We have been, and let me be clear, there are 6 of us who had been saying this all along. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Presley, Representative Tlaib, Representative Bowman, Representative Omar, and myself. We have been saying this for weeks that this would happen. And we took the hits. We were told that we were anti our caucus, we were anti-democracy, we were anti-this and that.
Wait, they've been saying that Joe Manchin wasn't going to do this for months?
I guess
actually,
that's what
we were and what we still are is pro the people, because the people have to be first. The people have to win. And so when I think about this this was a no all along. And so what we had was a bit of leverage, which was
they're really trying to paint this picture that he made this decision despite this overwhelming outcry from his constituents that they want this, which is not based in any reality.
Having the coupling of the 2 bills, the BIF, the infrastructure package, as well as the Build Back Better Act. Having those coupled together was the only leverage we had. And what did the caucus do? We tossed it, and for me, it's really, it's sad. It's sad.
Well, I will say she is right about that part of it, that there was a little bit of leverage there. But you know what? But that's the thing. When the caucus tossed it, it was because they felt like they were never going to get it passed, anything passed. They thought, we have no chance of getting literally anything passed unless we decouple these 2 things. And so, I mean, what does she want? She wants to get nothing done, like literally nothing done. Like she doesn't want anything done. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing to me that they're just so, this is the way it works though, right? You know why I think they're so angry at him? I think they're so angry at him because they're so used to Democrats always walk in lockstep. Yes. Nobody ever steps out of line.
Right.
And finally someone does step out of line and they can't handle it. Like they're so angry. This happens to Republicans always.
Sure.
Always. And it's not one, it's several. It's always like 6 or something.
Right.
And, you got Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. And those are just the 3 I can name off the top of my head. There's a bunch of others who betray the conservative end of the spectrum all the time. So we're used to it.
Yeah.
But
let's not talk about judges either.
Right. And they're not used to it. This is a deep betrayal. You always go with the hard
blind side.
Yeah.
Being out.
Oh, our second favorite socialist.
Well, I think what Senator Manchin did yesterday represents such an egregious breach of the trust of the president. And it's also
trust of the president.
So, this is exactly why it's an outcome that we had warned about well over a month ago about needing to plan a contingency plan for it. It's why we insisted on having the bipartisan infrastructure plan coupled and passed together with the
them all using that talking point.
Yeah.
The reason why they're doing that is that's not to criticize Joe Manchin. That's to criticize Nancy Pelosi. That's what that is. Because the people who made that decision were the Democrat leadership. They're the ones that decided to cut a deal to get the other bill passed, the infrastructure bill passed, by decoupling these 2 things.
So
she's trashing Nancy Pelosi there. That's what she's saying without saying her name. That's what she's doing.
Okay, well, I do want to get to that. Do you want to keep listening to some more of these people being upset?
Let's just see the next socialist, and then we can. Yeah, she's a socialist. We can go from here.
Negotiation, because we held up the infrastructure bill, we were able to get that agreement moving.
This is Rashida Tlaib, by the way.
Remember, Jake, was rolled out the day before the president went to, or the day that the president went to Europe for COP26. That is the framework that had the commitment. And I think that,
so they're all saying the same.
It's not, I don't think it's accurate to say we're very far apart. I think, or that they're very far apart. I think that there are some details that need to be worked out. I think there was a commitment that was made by Senator Manchin to the president about that framework. And I think now the question is, what about making sure that this legislation is what that framework was, plus what of the things that have been agreed to beyond that can be incorporated. So
First of all, this is Pramila Jayapal. She's I butchered her name, I'm sure, but she's one of the big leaders of the Progressive Caucus in the House, and a big ally of AOC and all those people. So they're all on the same page. I would hardly say that these things are meltdowns, by the way, which is the title of this video. That was a little misleading, I think. But they are clearly all giving the same talking point. And the talking point is the leadership should never have, decoupled the infrastructure bill from this thing, because, if they had just kept it all the same, we could have forced Joe Manchin's hand by saying, we won't get anything at all if you don't do this. And so I have a sneaking suspicion that wouldn't have worked. But
yeah, I'm very curious though, because you said that all these talking points make it seem like they're taking a jab at Nancy Pelosi, and I'm very curious of what's the next couple of steps, right? Because obviously they're all pouting about this thing that they thought was going to pass, not passing. And I've heard some rumors about how, this isn't even like a popular piece of legislation, that even if they did get it passed, it's not something that's going to get, potential voters excited come the next election, right? So it's like they got to just drop this, cut their losses, turn their focus onto something that's a little bit more popular. But I don't know. What do you think? What's the next couple of steps? If you're the Democratic strategist going forward, what do you think they're planning here?
So at some point, and this is going to be part of the problem, they, I think, probably disagree about the best path forward, even politically. But what people need to understand about this is that the reason why they care so much about this is because they all know that their chances of winning in 2022 are very, very low. And the closer you get to that election, the more difficult it's going to be for the people who are in states that are not hard left to go along with these kinds of bills. And so, especially in the House, it's a bigger problem in the House, especially. So in order to get anything done, they have to do it essentially now, because or they have to have something that's more of a compromise type bill that involves some Republicans. And that's not going to be anything that the far left wants anything to do with. So this is the far left's last chance to get something done.
Yeah.
And I think that if I was a political strategist, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to try to win in 2022, then my goal, what I would do is I'd get them all in a room and I'd say, pass moderate legislation. Go to the moderate Republicans, cut deals with them, and pass moderate legislation. But the socialist type people won't stand for that. So if Joe Biden has an opportunity here to do what Bill Clinton did and to reset his presidency and to work across the aisle and to get a bunch of Republicans on board and find things that they all can vote for and to pass that legislation, but he has no interest in doing that whatsoever.
Well, so I'm just curious about, because we're always talking about the almost like a balancing act on the left and right, if I want to be fair, about just the more moderate wing of the party and the more extreme wing of the party. So we know that there has been a friction between the AOCs of the world and the Nancy Pelosi's. And in this scenario, we're talking about Nancy Pelosi as being the moderate compared to AOC. And if you're talking about some of these talking points being a kind of veiled attack on Nancy Pelosi, is there going to be a push by the more radical wing of the Democratic Party to take over, maybe not necessarily the speaker role, but more of an important role in the Democratic Party? Or am I reaching?
They have no chance of doing that because they're going to get slaughtered politically in 2022. They're going to lose all of their power. And that's the problem. They are this. But
I could see AOC, come election time when there is some circular firing squad stuff going on, being no, it's not my fault. The legislation wasn't too radical. It was your guys' fault for not doing these things, to coupling the whatever with the whatever.
I don't disagree with that, but the problem is they're not going to have control of Congress.
Right.
So they won't even get to vote. They won't have no say in who the leadership is come next year around this time. It's going to be gone, essentially. You're going to have Republicans are going to win the House. A year from now, Republicans are going to be in charge of the House. Not officially, it'll happen in January, but in a year from now, they will be gearing up to take over the House. And the Speaker of the House will not be Nancy Pelosi. it won't be a Democrat. That's what's going to happen. And they know, see, and that's the thing. They know that. So they are panicked. They're panicked because they need to do something now. Now is it. Now is the time. If you don't do something now, then you basically guarantee you're not going to get anything done in 2022 that's of serious consequence. You might get some small things done, but not big sweeping legislation. 2023 is a lost cause because Republicans are going to control the House. 2024 also a lost cause because Republicans are going to control the House. Now you're looking at 2025, 4 years from now, before they have really any chance of doing anything, or 3.5 years or whatever.
Yeah, this is just kind of capping off a really bad year for Joe Biden. Like, seriously, this is one of the worst first years of a president easily in my lifetime.
Right.
I mean, this is terrible.
And terrible, and really a bad this was supposed to be, from, if you're going to look at a global scale, this was supposed to be the big turning point year for the Great Reset movement. This was it. Last year was the start of it, but this was with Joe Biden in the White House. This was supposed to be the year. With John Kerry's out there saying, we're going to make this happen. It's going to happen faster than anybody thinks, with greater intensity than anybody realizes this is going to happen. And Joe Biden comes into office and he's got all these Build Back Better plans, and he's putting all these things out there, and he's able to do a lot of stuff through executive orders and through regulations and the SEC and all this other stuff. Yes. And they still can do a ton of Great Reset stuff.
Sure.
But the one half of the Great Reset, all of these big Green New Deal type programs and the expansion of government programs, the universal pre-K and expansion of healthcare and all these things through the government, those things are not likely to happen in the United States now.
Yeah.
Not for a while.
I've got one more kind of bad news story for the Great Reset. But another thing that's kind of really kind of savaging the Biden administration is the continuing pandemic that's going on, right, with COVID and all of that. So Omicron is the newest variant, and it's not been good. It's not been good. There's been more like deaths from COVID in Biden's first year than the last year of the Trump administration, all of this stuff. So they have to kind of blame this, it can't be a failure on the Biden administration's part. No. They've got to have someone else take the blame. So of course it's the unvaccinated people. It's the unvaccinated people who are to blame. So the White House literally issued this statement, which has been getting a lot of buzz. So I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on this, Justin. This was a White House statement that says, we are intent on not letting Omicron disrupt work and school for the vaccinated. You've done the right thing, and we will get through this. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm. That's pretty bleak, man. I mean, like there was blunt statements put out by like the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself. But this was pretty bleak. This is one for the record books, man. What are your thoughts when you saw this?
Again, it's like, it's so, I'm trying to understand what the politics of this decision to put out this statement, like the political strategists in the room in the White House who determined signed off on this. How, what was the strategy? Like, what was the strategy here? Yeah. I mean, how does this win votes?
Yeah.
How
does
this
just threaten them?
I mean, like that, it's just so bizarre. And then the other, I mean, it's bizarre for a variety of reasons. One of the most obvious is politically, this doesn't make sense. Why would you yell essentially at a bunch of people who have made up their minds? They're not getting the vaccine. Like at this point, everyone's had access to it. If you haven't gotten it by now, then you're probably not getting it. And yelling at these people is not going to make them more likely to go out and get it. If anything, it's going to be like, you know what? Screw you. Like I'm definitely not getting it. Don't threaten me.
Even worse than that is, I mean, I don't know if this is just kind of rumors or whatever, but just the concept of like, if you don't get the boosters, then they're going to start classifying you as unvaccinated because you're not fully vaccinated.
Right.
So it's like, is this also a kind of a veiled, it's not even veiled. Is this like a threat to not only the unvaccinated, but the people that are hesitant about getting endless boosters?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clearly a threat. I mean,
Right,
how can anybody look at this as anything other than a threat from the White House to the general public? And one of the least vaccinated groups in terms of population percentage, as has been pointed out many times, is African Americans, who last I checked vote Democrat down the line pretty much at a very, very high rate. Why would you alienate groups of people who probably voted for you? I don't understand the logic of this politically. Yeah,
the younger people, you are, the less likely to be vaccinated. There's
younger people. There's just a lot of people who just don't want to get vaccinated, and they don't necessarily fall into one political camp or another. It's just a lot of people who I know, super, super, super conservative people who are all about the vaccine. And I know super, super, super conservative people who won't get vaccinated. And I know super, super, super liberal people who are all about the vaccine. And I know other super liberal people who are just like, I don't think I want to get the vaccine. And so it's like, it's just, and I think everybody kind of knows that it's not necessarily a political thing. I know that they're trying to make it political, but it's not really political. It
comes off as just like a administration that's floundering, and they're just so upset. They're so upset that any of this stuff that's being like derailed and like, you know, there's obviously a whole line of thought that's like, no, all of this pandemic and this lockdowns and restrictions and all this is playing into their agenda, but like, surely there is stuff that's being hampered by the prevalence of COVID. You know that the administration wanted to come in and first year knock COVID out and be like, oh, we were the administration that was able to kind of put COVID in its place so everyone can go back to normal.
What's so bizarre about that, though, is they've looked at the world like there are many countries in the world that are further left than the United States, that are more authoritarian than the United States, that have done more lockdowns and more like extreme measures against COVID, and they have not gotten rid of it either. So it's like, you can have all the vaccines you want. Like, you're not going to totally get rid of it. That is the science, actually. The science says you're not going to get rid of it no matter what you do, essentially. It's never going to actually totally go away.
Sure.
So, I mean, even if you... So I don't understand the logic of this statement. It's like they're angry that people are not getting vaccinated, but I don't really see how this in any way helps them politically. Even if people did go out and get vaccinated, it wouldn't necessarily solve all the problems that might be hampering them. The other thing, and I don't know if you could look this up on the fly here, but the other thing is, you know, the vaccine, this is specifically mentioning Omicron, okay? The new variant, which really hasn't, been a huge issue here in the United States just yet, but it is going to be almost certainly.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Well, in terms of people contracting it, I'm sure people will contract it at a high rate.
Supposedly super contagious, but the jury's still out on how dangerous it is.
Correct.
Some people are suggesting it's the most mild version yet.
That's true. There are some studies that seem to indicate that, but I think there needs to be more before we know exactly how deadly it is relative to the other variants. But my understanding is that the current vaccines don't protect you very well against this variant. So the idea that, oh, well, if you're vaccinated, don't worry, everything's going to be totally fine. Omicron's not going to do anything to you.
Yeah.
But if you're not vaccinated, you're as good as dead. Sorry. Just, you might as well start digging your gravesite now, because, it's all over for you. It's like, what is the science that says that? Where are you getting the science that indicates that if you get the vaccine, you're definitely not getting this variant? Number one. And number two, that this variant is super deadly and is going to wipe people out at a much higher rate than what we've seen before. Where's the science that shows us that? Is there a single scientific study that says either of those things? My understanding is that there is not. So I don't even understand the statement. Again, it almost, if this was just something he said as he's like, sauntering off to his in that field, that video that we saw earlier, where he's just walking sadly off into a field somewhere, probably at the White House or whatever.
He does that on a daily basis.
And someone yells to him and says, what do you think of the Omicron variant, Joe? And he yells back this. That would make sense. But to put out an official statement like this from the White House is like, this had to be vetted by multiple people. This had to be signed off by the president of the United States. Like, this had to be, this was well constructed,
for a while. Yeah.
Right. And So to do this is like, I can't see the political advantage. I don't see how it actually will result in us not having this variant happen here. I don't understand any of the logic behind this. Again, it seems like someone who is just in a panic, a free fall panic, just screaming at the sky, like
trying to blame everyone around them.
Yeah, because it's just like, this can't be happening to me. This is my worst nightmare. I'm a failure as a president. I'm super old. I can barely remember my name. And now I'm going to go down in history as one of the worst presidents of all time. And it's not my fault. I swear to God, I know it seems like it's my fault, but it isn't. And so you release this statement for the unvaccinated. You're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves and your families, and the hospitals may seem overwhelmed. You horrible, horrible people who ruined my presidency. Like, that's that's the subtext of all this, isn't it?
It really is.
Like, it's just so angry.
Oh, we got to wrap this episode up, but I have one more short story that I want to bring up. This will cap off the concept of the bad week for the Great Reset, because not only has the Omicron variant driven the president insane, apparently, but it's also been successful in delaying, yet again, the World Economic Forum's Davos summit. So the Davos summit was slated for, I think, like mid-January, and now it's not going to happen until mid-2022. So probably 5 or 6 months being delayed here. This is the latest delay in a series of delays. I think that this is the same one that was supposed to happen in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So now we're like almost 2 years later. This is supposedly going to happen before it's delayed again by some another variant.
It would have been 2021, I think. 2020, I think, because that was the start of COVID, right?
2020, March of
2020. So January, they had a meeting in January of 2020. So it would have been 2021. So
at least a year this thing has been delayed.
A full year of delays, but it'll be more than a year because it's being delayed again into the summer. So it'll be it'll be 18 months without having an actual event.
Yeah, current pandemic conditions made it extremely difficult to deliver a global in-person meeting. Preparations have been guided by expert advice and have benefited from the close collaboration of the Swiss government at all levels, the Geneva-based World Economic Forum said on their website. Obviously, they're going to keep talking about, safety first, health first, all of this stuff. But again, these... while a lot of these conferences, and we've talked about this before, a lot of these conferences are just for show and for little soundbite stuff, almost promotional material, so that they can kind of put them in little compilation videos when they're doing advertisements for this type of stuff. Sure. But there are, and we know this, there are behind the scenes closed door meeting type stuff that do happen, that do have real impacts. That are being delayed because of this. So again, another bad week for the Great Reset.
Really bad.
Be happier.
Really bad. I will say that if I, and this was wild speculation, but they did just have that meeting, COP26 in Glasgow. That was in October or November, and November, I think early November, and they did get a lot done at that meeting.
Yes.
And so maybe they're right. And so maybe they're looking at this and they're just saying, you know what, like, we don't really need to get together this time. Maybe it's not really worth it. We just got a lot of stuff done in Glasgow. We've got this Omicron thing. We'll just put it off for 6 more months. But it is a bad week for them. The Great Reset people are, and we should do something on this at some point in time. Maybe we need to wait a little bit longer to do this, but we are getting to the point now where I think it's pretty safe to say that it's close to being able to say that it's safe to say this, I guess you could say. But
being very careful with your language. Go ahead.
I'm being very, very careful that the Great Reset push is on the verge of collapse.
I agree. And
I think it's on the verge of collapse.
We've been seeing this. We've been monitoring this for a while now.
Yeah.
Between them just kind of running away from the term the Great Reset, that very embarrassing video where they're apologizing for using the words the Great Reset. There's a couple of other things that come to mind.
Yeah, they're not going to stop. They're going to keep trying.
Yeah, their plan is very good.
It's very, very good. And it can work even with all of these failures, but it can't work in the way that they were planning on it working.
Yeah.
With these big sort of sweeping pieces of legislation right beside these big, ESG changes and all that. They're going to get the ESG stuff. They're going to get the central bank type stuff. They're going to try to get a new digital currency. They're going to do a lot of stuff on that end of the spectrum. But on the other side, like the other component to this with the big sweeping government changes and the stuff where people are actually held directly accountable.
Rubber meeting the road.
Yeah. The places where people actually are elected by others and they have to worry about that and worry about what regular people think. That part of it is not doing well.
Right.
It's the part where you can do it all in back rooms with bankers and corporate people and all of that. Those people are doing fine. It's the politicians that are struggling to make the push for this thing. And it's because regular people don't want it. That's the thing. Regular people don't want it. And so they're continuing to struggle. And we're not anywhere near out of the woods at all in total. This thing is going to go on potentially for 10 more years or more, who knows? And they are going to make lots of progress on the ESG side of things and the banking and all of that regulatory end and the money printing. But as far as the big legislative pushes and that's the end of the spectrum, I think that we are the people who, the good guys, I guess you could say, are winning that battle right now. And that's a good thing.
And that's a good thing. Yeah, and hopefully another thing that'll add to that push is the upcoming Glenn Beck book, which is co-authored by Justin Haskins right over here, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism, which will be coming out January 11th.
You had something to do with that book, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm a contributor or something like that. I'm mentioned in there once or twice.
You're in there somewhere. I think you're on the title page, actually.
Yeah,
your name might be even a little bigger than mine. We got to check the font size.
Yeah, we're gonna have to measure that one out.
Get that.
But yeah, I pre-ordered my copy. They've been. I don't know if this is a marketing thing. I'm not in these meetings. But they've been really trying to push people to pre-order this because of the different supply chain disruptions and these printers. And I know this personally, printers are having difficulty getting like paper and stuff. So, when they gauge how much of these books to print based on pre-orders and all of that, and if they run out, it might be a while before a second printing. So if you want to make sure that you have a copy come January 11th, you might want to pre-order it. That's more or less my marketing pitch for this. But
no, that's a real problem, because if they have to do a second print run, there are lots of paper shortages and things like that. It is not clear how long it will take if they have to do a big, because remember, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of books, right? So if they have to do a second print run of that, it might be delayed by a month or something. It's possible.
Exactly.
We don't know. So yeah, pre-order your copy now, and that will guarantee that you have it. Or you can buy the Kindle version, or a digital copy on Nook or something like that.
Yeah.
If you don't care to have the actual physical copy, but the physical copy is beautiful.
Yeah, get the audiobook version that unfortunately isn't read by me. I don't know why they made that decision, but whatever.
I don't either.
All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of Justin and Donald Save America. If you like our show, like I said, just hit that like button, leave a comment. Comments is actually something that it really helps the algorithm for whatever reason. So leave a comment. Make sure to subscribe if you're not a subscriber already, and share this content. Justin, is there any last words, wisdom, or anything else you want to get off your chest before we shut it down?
Nope.
All right, fantastic. All right, thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.